Hi everyone, welcome to today's webinar. I will go ahead and get started. Just as an overview, you may have just heard that this presentation is being recorded. So today we're going to talk about FDA's recent letters that they sent this summer to drug companies regarding pharmaceutical advertisements and what we can take away from that. There we go. So just a little overview about myself. My name is Rebecca Zadaka, and I am an associate attorney at Gardner Law Firm, and I work in the regulatory group. So for those of you who may not know, Gardner Law Firm works primarily with FDA-regulated companies on a variety of topics, including regulatory, compliance, and privacy matters. So a few things I wanted to talk about today. First, I wanted to just give an overview of what is advertising and promotion in the device and pharma world, since it's slightly different than what you might expect for typical products. I also wanted to talk about what the US regulatory oversight is in this area and what some risks of non-compliant promotion look like. And then I wanted to do a deeper look into the summer's Untitled and warning letters and talk about what we can take away from those letters. And then at the end, we'll have some time for Q&A. So if you wouldn't mind, please reserving any questions till the end, that would be great. Thank you. So I wanted to just give a broad overview of what advertising and promotion in the device and pharma world looks like and what some things are to keep in mind when creating advertisements. So something to touch base on right at the start is what is label versus labeling. So label is a display of written, printed, or graphic matter that's actually on the immediate container of the product. Whereas labeling is a little bit more broad, and it includes all labels and other written, printed, or graphic matter that's either on the product or its containers or wrappers, or accompanying the article. And accompanying is defined pretty liberally, and it doesn't just mean physical association with the product. It also can extend to certain things like posters, tags, pamphlets, circulars, and other types of information that come with the product. So then you might ask, so when does advertising become labeling? Well, most, if not all, advertising in the device and pharma world is actually labeling. So that being said, companies need to be very mindful about what they're saying about their products in their advertising and promotional materials to make sure that they are compliant. So what are some forms of promotional labeling? Well, there are a few that you're probably very familiar with, such as TV and print advertisements. You know, we've all seen commercials on TV for drugs, or you might see an advertisement that's in a magazine. But it's also good to keep in mind that any communication that's created, sponsored, or distributed by a company discussing its products may be considered promotional labeling. So this can extend to things such as an oral interaction. If a sales representative is talking to someone about the product, they need to be mindful about what they're saying to make sure that it's all accurate. The website for the product, that's also promotional labeling. The website is often how most people are going to learn about a drug or device, so it needs to be accurate and compliant. Same goes for posts that are on social media. And as we'll talk about later on the Untitled and warning letters, social media posts have become very prevalent today and can also create an opportunity for advertising and promotion, but it needs to be compliant still. So now let's talk a little bit about the US regulatory oversight for device and drug advertising. Advertising is regulated by both the FDA and the FTC. The FDA is the primary regulatory agency that oversees drug and device advertising, whereas the FTC oversees product advertisement and trade in general. So there are a few laws and regulations that I just wanted to highlight briefly today that will come up in our discussions on the untitled and warning letters. The first one being what constitutes a drug or device becoming misbranded under the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. So a device or drug can be misbranded if its labeling is false or misleading in any particular. And we'll see a little bit more about what that means in practice with the letters. There are a couple of pharmaceutical specific regulations that I wanted to highlight. These are not all of them. There are many more, but these are a couple that will come up in the letters as well. The first one being that all advertisements for any prescription drug must have a true statement of information and brief summary relating to the side effects, contraindications, and effectiveness of the drug. Additionally, this applies to the entire advertisement. If there is some untrue or misleading information in one part of the advertisement, having the correct information later in the advertisement will not fix the addition of the incorrect information. And we'll see this come up a couple times in some of the letters as well. So what are some examples of what this might look like? Well, we can all think about blatantly incorrect or exaggerated information, but there are also more subtle ways that a promotion can be misleading. This can look like an incorrect or half-true statement regarding the drug or device or its outcomes. This might be something like a claim that X% of the population benefited from this drug, when in reality that X% was actually a very small number of people, meaning the claim isn't exactly true. There's some information missing. You might see unsubstantiated claims regarding the therapeutic outcomes or superiority of a drug. This might look like a statement claiming to be better than another product without any evidence to actually back that up. There might be ambiguous claims intended to create an implied claim. This could be something like an advertisement having children running around and playing in the ad, when in reality the drug is not indicated for use in children. The ad creates the impression that it can be used in children. You might see subjective statements that cannot be substantiated. And this might look like a rep telling a doctor that this therapy is better than another without any evidence to back it up. Or there could be withholding of material facts, which might look like not including the appropriate risk information to give the full picture on the device or drug's claims. Or you might see misleading or extraordinary physician or patient testimonials. And this can look like a patient talking about a drug or device, maybe in a video saying that the drug was life-saving, when in reality the drug isn't necessarily life-saving, but may have just really improved the patient's life. So now I want to talk about an example of a bad ad that did get the company in trouble. So to start off, this post is not just a post from Kim Kardashian, it's actually an advertisement for the drug and constitutes product labeling. This post was attributed to the company because Kim Kardashian was a paid sponsor for the ad, and she did not make that known. But as you will see in this post, it's all positive information about the drug, and it doesn't include any of the risk information which needed to be there. So lo and behold, the company did get a warning letter stating that the post was false or misleading because it failed to communicate any risk information and omitted material facts. So there can be a range of consequences that can result from bad ads. And there's a whole slew of things that can happen depending on the circumstances. It could range from just bad publicity from the negative interactions with the FDA, or you could end up having withdrawal of a product approval, or warning or entitled letters, like we'll talk about later, or even any civil or criminal consequences. So now I wanted to talk a little bit more about untitled and warning letters. So an untitled letter is typically a pre-warning letter that is sent to a company, and it's usually sent for issues that do not quite meet the regulatory threshold for a warning letter. They typically don't require a corrective dissemination, but they do ask that any violations be ceased. And they really just serve as, I guess, a pre-warning warning to the company to let them know that the FDA is aware of their violation. A warning letter, on the other hand, is more serious and can lead to an FDA enforcement. It does require a corrective action, as we will see later. And warning letters are typically sent when an issue is something that the FDA believes needs to be corrected because it's of greater regulatory significance. But an FDA may also send a warning letter as opposed to an untitled letter if there has been a history between FDA and the company on a certain issue. So up until this summer, OPDP had, the Office of Prescription Drug Promotions, had not sent any pharmaceutical companies an untitled letter for a little over a year, which was the longest gap in recent years that OPDP had not sent a warning letter. Most recent warning letters in the last few years have dealt with whether the promotional materials are consistent with the product's approved labeling. So now I want to do just a little bit of a deeper analysis of this summer's untitled and warning letters and talk about what we can learn from them. So the first letter was sent on June 7th, 2023 to Xeris Pharmaceuticals regarding its drug Recorlev. And OPDP highlighted that a couple of web pages brand form Recorlev presented misleading safety and efficacy information for the drug. So Recorlev is indicated for patients with Cushing's syndrome where surgery isn't an option or isn't curative. And as you can see, there are several potential side effects that could result from Recorlev that are highlighted in this letter. So there were a few false or misleading claims due to efficacy that OPDP flagged. So something to flag right away that we saw in the regulations above is that a drug can be misleading not only because of representations that are made or suggested in the promotion, but also the extent to which material facts are not included in the promotion, but really should have been based on what was said. So the first issue that was flagged in this letter pertained to some information on the What is Recorlev page that overstated the drug's efficacy. You'll see in the middle of the page that the web page claimed that 67% of patients who moved on to the second part of the study had normal cortisol levels by the end of the study, which is not exactly an accurate representation of what the study showed. In reality, 67% of patients did have normal levels, but not at the end of the study. Instead, that was at the end of the titration phase, which was just one of 3 phases of the study. Meaning that to say that 67% had normal levels at the end of the study misleadingly overstated the efficacy of the drug. To add insult to injury, OPDP flagged that the webpage also failed to include a precautionary message that the PI or prescribing information had about interpreting results of this study. Apparently, 51% of patients in the study discontinued the treatment with the drug prematurely due to things such as adverse reaction or lack of efficacy. And the PI said that these results should be interpreted with precaution. Because this information was not on the web page, it added to the misleading impression that was created by the information presented. Another claim on this web page that overstated the efficacy stated that 52% of patients who were on the drug had normal cortisol levels, when actually the number of this 52% was actually a very small number. Of the original 79 patients in the study, at the end, there were only 21 left, and this 52% was 11 patients out of the 21 that remained in the study. So to say that 52% of patients had normal cortisol levels while taking this drug greatly overstated the efficacy of the drug. So this letter also flagged some misleading information due to the risks of Recorlev. As you'll see in the center of the letter, there are, on the Taking Recorlev webpage, there are some notes regarding side effects. It says heart and liver tests before and during treatment with Recorlev will help your doctor avoid side effects. And for side effects, it just says side effects can occur, including some that are serious. Now, the letter took issue with this, and particularly because Recorlev actually had a boxed warning for some serious side effects associated with the drug, including some that are potentially fatal. The PI for Recorlev's box warning highlighted hepatotoxicity and QT prolongation, which are not highlighted in this section. There's missing information. This also was concerning given that a number of the patients in the study actually did experience these life-threatening side effects, and the letter or their website failed to call that out. This is also a situation where OPDP flagged that they do acknowledge that the company did include the accurate information later in the webpage in the indication and important safety information, but we can see here that they say this did not mitigate the misleading impression that was already created. So, as we'll see for each Untitled letter, there are some things that the FDA does ask the company to do. OPDP requested that Xeris cease any violations of the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, so to stop sharing any piece that was in violation. And then they asked for a written letter in response to this Untitled letter within 15 days from receipt, addressing several concerns in the letter. So another letter that was sent later in the summer on August 11th was sent to Xeltis USA Inc. for their drug Slind. This letter also noted some concerns regarding false or misleading claims about the safety or efficacy that was presented in actually a social media post. So just a little bit of background on the drug Slind. It's an oral contraceptive pill that, as you'll see here, actually has quite a few risks that were associated with it, which leads us into the first issue that OPDP had, was that there was false or misleading risk information because none was present in the social media post. So as we talked about earlier, you do need to have that risk information included in the post, and this one just did not have any of that. The post also created some false or misleading claims due to the efficacy of the drug. The post stated that the patients who are taking Slind can expect menstrual cycles on a schedule, when in reality, this was not what the clinical studies showed of the drug. In reality, of 81.2 patients who had started the drug had normal scheduled bleeding, but this decreased to 26.4. And another group who had 98% scheduled predictability, this went down to 28.4%. So not only is this just plain misleading, but it's wrong based on what the clinical studies show. So the same result as before, OPDP asks that Xeltis cease any violations and respond in a letter. So now we're going to change gears a little bit and look at the warning letter that was sent this summer. This warning letter was sent on August 4th, 2023, and it was sent to AstraZeneca regarding their drug Breztri Aerosphere. And the warning letter highlighted some concerns that a sales aide had made regarding false or misleading claims due to regarding the efficacy of the drug. So Breztri is indicated for the maintenance treatment of chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, or COPD. So the letter first flagged some claims that dealt with some claims that were made based on all-cause mortality data that was observed in a clinical study. And OPDP took issue with the way that this data was presented and said that it misleadingly overstated the efficacy of the drug, because these claims that were made based on all-cause mortality were not exactly what was found in the clinical study. In reality, all-cause mortality was just one of multiple secondary endpoints for the study, and the study had no significant results on this all-cause mortality, which in the end does not allow for any conclusions to be drawn on it. It was also noted that there were some other compounding factors that could have also affected this data, and this was not considered in the sales aid when it made those claims. So, OPDP did note that there was a graph that stated later on that these results are observational in nature, and any comparisons between treatment arms should be treated with precaution. But as OPDP stated, that this, again, did not mitigate the misleading impression that was already created. And something to note in this warning letter that was not present in the Untitled letters is for each time that OPDP stated that there was a misleading claim, they state that these claims and presentations are concerning from a public health perspective because they overstate the efficacy of the drug. So we can see that OPDP has identified a public health risk based on this advertisement that we didn't quite see in the Untitled letters. So another issue with the sales aid that OPDP had was on the way that the sales aid presented the statistical significance of study data. OPDP notes that the sales aid contained claims relating to, the exacerbation reduction of the drug, and the sales aid included a p-value that looks to be statistically significant. It's less than 0.05. But this result in reality was not actually statistically significant based on the established threshold that the study had, and therefore created an impression that it was more significant than the data actually was. So this time we'll see that the reaction is a little bit different. OPDP did request, just like in the Untitled letters, that AstraZeneca cease any violations of the Act and submit a written response within 15 days with the same information. Now it says that failure to adequately address this matter will lead to a regulatory action. Additionally, now AstraZeneca, as opposed to in any Untitled letters, AstraZeneca was asked to submit a comprehensive plan of action to disseminate truthful, non-misleading, and complete corrective communications about the concerns discussed in this letter. The corrective communications needed to be disseminated to the audience that received the original promotional communication. And to the extent possible, that corrective communication should be distributed using the same media and generally for the same duration of time and with the same frequency as the promotional communications identified in the letter. So as we can see, the results of the warning letter are slightly different than the Untitled letter, and there are more consequences if the company does not act the way OPDP is asking them to. So to summarize, FDA's letters show that OPDP's letters show that the FDA is not ignoring some of these bad ads despite that that long period of time without any warning or untitled letters. In fact, this shows that the data is being scoured. I mean, the letters really highlighted some data that was used to support ads that was from clinical trials, and fine data points are being identified here. So what can we learn from these letters and what can we take away? So these letters, even though they aren't sent to any of us, assuming that, they serve as a reminder that OPDP is looking at these drugs, whether they're submitted through a Form 2253 or whether they are flagged through the bad ad program. They are watching and they are looking at the data points to make sure that not only are any claims blatantly wrong, but also some of those implied claims, like we talked about earlier, that can result from things like half-true statements or misleading or missing information. So this serves as a chance to really take a look at your ads and any ads that we plan on sharing to make sure, are they compliant? And do they not only have all the required material, but are they presenting all the material that should be there? Is there any material that's misleading or missing? So it's good to keep in mind that OPDP is watching. They are looking at the fine data points, and it should serve as a warning to everyone to make sure that their ads are compliant. So I can now take any questions that you might have. And if there aren't any, that's totally fine. Feel free to reach out to me. My email and phone number are included here. So you are more than welcome to reach out to me, and I'm happy to help answer any questions that do come up. If there's something you maybe don't want to ask now or you think about later, feel free to do so.
Yeah, Rebecca, this is Nate Downing. I had a question and something that's worth considering. What are some of the considerations that you look for in clinical studies to really understand whether it's being presented in a truthful and non-misleading manner versus, sometimes, you could have good data, but the type of study maybe isn't strong enough to just put that data out by itself. So are there any ways that we can look specifically to a clinical study, or even if it's a non-clinical study, bench testing, whatever it might be, to better understand how to balance those data points being used?
Yeah, thank you for your question. I would suggest, if you do have a study or some data you want to use, it's better to include more information and maybe even a disclaimer, really putting all the information and considerations out there. For example, the data point where the group, where they said 52% showed certain results, but the group was actually very small. It might have been helpful to actually include all of that information, maybe in an asterisk or just a note on that study, just highlighting actually what the data is and where it came from. So it's always better to include more information, even if it doesn't make your data look as good, if it helps make sure it's truthful.
Thank you. And I do have it's kind of an interesting topic lately with, FTC's, endorsement guidance that they've put out, and kind of really how they've clamped down on that. What, if you are going to, review something with an endorsement, what are you looking for, to make sure it's clear that maybe there is a relationship? Is there certain keywords or placement, or, what would you recommend?
Yeah, thank you for that question. Yeah, I would really recommend being upfront and clear that it is a paid endorsement, and that should really be at the top of the post, so that if someone is looking at it, they know that this, for example, celebrity like Kim Kardashian in that example, isn't just promoting this drug because they liked it and they think everyone should use it, but it's really important to show that they are actually paid to say these things, because it does impact the way viewers, take in that information. So putting that information out there right up front that it is a paid endorsement is very important to do.
Thank you. And that impacts both FTC and FDA considerations, right? Like it goes to
Yes.
Both agencies.
Yes, that is correct.
Thank you.
Rebecca, there is a question that came in.
Mhm. Okay.
Can you give some general guidelines for using patient testimonials?
Sure. Yeah, so patient testimonials, of course, backgrounds, they should be completely de-identified, but it's also important to make sure that it's clear that that's just this one patient's view. So you could include something like individual results may vary, or something to the extent that this is just this patient's own experience with the drug or device. And you want to make sure, of course, the patient isn't saying anything that could be off-label or something that you wouldn't want to promote. And you'll also want to make sure that the patient testimonial matches any available clinical data as well.
Sorry, I was trying to type a question too on that. So, it matches available clinical data, but like how close, like, can you have some go above, some go beyond? Like, is it if you consider one or if you consider multiple patients, like how do you view, the totality of testimonials a company puts out there?
Sure. I think if I understand your question correctly, you're asking me, what if a patient's own experience or testimonial falls outside of the available clinical data? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, just how would you treat that scenario?
Yeah, in that situation, I guess it might depend on how far out there. I mean, there's of course a little bit of room for variability sometimes with personal experience. If it's not too far out there, it would help to include some sort of disclaimer that this is just this own patient's experience, and assuming that it's all on label and something that you would want to promote.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think there's another question too, if I'm looking at the questions. Can you talk a little bit more about having a patient testimonial on a company's healthcare provider website for a drug? And so I think, Catherine, are you, maybe make sure I understand this question, are you asking more from like a third-party healthcare provider website, but they're putting a testimonial regarding that company's drug?
Oh, she's asking if she can be unmuted. Allie, are you able to help with that?
I actually don't think we have the ability to do that in this webinar, Rebecca. So I'm sorry about that, Kathleen. Do you mind just typing? Thank you.
So just while Catherine's typing that, I see there is another question that came through that said, while this question probably requires a separate program, are there any thoughts on promotion to comply with the final guidance on real world evidence? Let me just think about that for a second. I might have to follow up with you on that one. I think I need to brush up on that data before I answer that. But Rhonda, if you wanted to send me your contact information, I would be more than happy to follow up with you. Or Nate, if you are familiar, feel free to jump in and help with Rhonda's question as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing to note is FDA wants real world evidence to be a part of the considerations. You know, a lot of companies, you know, have a lot of post-market surveillance, they have a lot of other programs, and, you know, real world evidence sometimes better mirrors what the outcomes might be, right? Your RCT that you run for pivotal might give you your best ever results. And so, you know, the next question is, how can I use some of this real world evidence? And even more so, how can some real world evidence be used for additional claims? And you know, the general guideline is, you know, your claims have to match real world evidence, right? Is it an observational study? Are you able to really come to conclusions? I think one thing that's difficult from a real world study, and you know, FDA's got multiple guidances on real world studies too about, you know, your proper audience, you know, even healthcare economics in some of those situations where you do have to balance the type of evidence you get from a real world study with, you know, the claims you can make. But certainly, you know, FDA in the last, I don't know, 5 years have multiple references to real world evidence and understanding, you know, the ability to use it and to message based on it. But it's just, you know, care has to be taken that claims match the actual evidence gathered. And so I, like you said, it's a little bit bigger topic than that. And, you know, my answer is pretty high level, but it would be a good topic for a future webinar to really build into how to use real world evidence appropriately.
Definitely. Thank you, Nate, and thank you for that question. So Catherine has added a little more. She says, you know, if there is an approved drug that has both a patient-facing website and a healthcare practitioner, healthcare physician website, is it allowable to have a patient testimonial on the website that's specific for the healthcare provider? And I would say you would just really need to consider whether it's data that you want to be portraying to the healthcare providers as opposed to, you know, broader data. But if you do have a patient testimonial, just to make sure that it includes all the appropriate information and that, you know, the information is specific to the individual and that, you know, data can vary as well on that. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, I'll maybe jump in there too. I think that's always an interesting situation. You know, you have to think about, you know, Rebecca was highlighting really the most important parts of, if you're going to be involved with it, you need to treat that like you would your own website, right? So if your company is going to create material to provide to a physician or to a hospital, you know, you've got to make sure that it's something that you could post on your own website. But there's also other legal ramifications, right? So is this being done as part of a co-marketing program where you have proper safeguards in place for anti-kickback, safe havens, or, you know, did someone ask and you put something together and now you've maybe created value for a hospital or for a physician group that could drive referrals, you know, could drive business. You know, that's one concern. And so you've got to make sure what type of framework you're providing that under. Is it a physician who just says, hey, I want to post a patient of mine who's talking about your drug, is that okay? And you don't have any involvement. Well, that's, you know, a different scenario. Now, you know, I still would recommend in those situations it's okay to remind them the labeling, and, you know, if they could stick with the labeling and make sure that, you know, they disclaim as best they can, right? They may not, but you are at least reminding them of what the indication for the drug is and what available evidence you might have, just to think about what it might look like if FDA stumbles upon it. You know, like I said, I think keeping a separate transaction and keeping it on their own certainly defends quite a bit of concerns, but you know, there's always that information is out in the system, and so if it's not matching your indication and it's not matching your evidence, you know, it could create a question. But the bigger concern is if you're doing that while you know, in concert with a hospital and you don't have like a co-marketing framework in place and you don't have proper review of that because it's on a hospital's website, that's going to be where the greatest risk occurs.
Thank you, Nate, and thank you for that question. Well, I don't see any more questions coming through, but thank you for those who did submit questions. And if anyone thinks of questions later on, please feel free to take down my contact information and let me know. I would be more than happy to follow up with you. So thank you everyone today for joining. I appreciate your being here, and I hope that it was informative and helpful. And I hope you all have a great rest of your day.